Stand up.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up. I've got an excellent guest. Andrew Seidel is back. He's from the Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, a very relevant and timely conversation and guest. Andrew is always great. That conversation begins at 24 minutes. If you want to skip ahead, but as always, I hope you don't. I hope you stay here for the news headlines and sound bites that I've gathered for you, as I do each and every day here on the program. And I can't do this work without your support. This show is totally listener funded. It is my full-time job. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. You support it with as little as $5 or more. Thank you very much. Kimberly Kelly, shout out to you for a very generous raise. You can always pay more if you want. Many of you have done that lately, and I am so grateful to all of you. You can also Venmo me a one-time payment if you're feeling generous. It's Pete-Dominic. And if you have any other questions as to how to get money in to support the podcast, standupwithpete@gmail.com. All right. Now time to get to those headlines. Brought to you by the compliments of listeners who care about the headlines. One major headline, of course, is that it's really hot here in the Northeast. Are you hot? I hope you are managing to stay cool and comfortable. And I know that it's very draining for a lot of folks, very challenging. So I hope you're okay here as we approach the first official day of summer. And they are letting us know, right? Huh? Who's they? Okay. Well, in other news that I want to get to, and very important news, mentioned this yesterday, but yesterday, President Biden announced sweeping new protections for undocumented immigrants who have been living illegally in the U.S. for at least a decade and who are married to American citizens. Of course, this blows the mind of right-wing anti-immigrant folks, but this is only 500,000 people it applies to. It'll shield spouses from deportation, provide a pathway to citizenship, and give them the ability to work legally in the U.S. It's a massive announcement, the biggest since DACA, according to one immigration reporter, for undocumented individuals in the United States. So that's major news and really important news. I think it's the obviously the right thing to do. You can't separate people from their spouses as a result of this. It's just so wrong. And so I'm glad that they did this at great risk of it being demonized and demagogued, which it will and has been anyway by the right and some centrists who just hate anything that allows people to come and stay in this country, obviously. Let's go to the Middle East, where the news from the New York Times, the U.S. pier for Gaza aid is failing. This $230 million temporary pier that the U.S. military built to rush humanitarian aid to Gaza has largely failed in its mission, according to aid organizations. It could be dismantled as early as next month. Let's see. Anthony Fauci has written a book. He's out doing all kinds of interviews and making headlines. That I'll see if I can get some audio for that. McDonald's is ending its test run of AI-powered drive-thrus with IBM. I don't know what the result of it is, but I'm happy about that. I still prefer humans. I'm old school. More than 500 structures damaged in New Mexico wildfire forced thousands to leave. A Texas megachurch pastor who advised Trump has resigned after a woman says he sexually abused her in the 1980s. His name is Robert Morris. The great Dan Savage tweeted about this. If kids got raped by clowns as often as they got raped by priests, it would be against the law to take your kids to the circus. It's a huge story. It's a huge church, and that guy is a pretty big deal. So the fact that these allegations came to light, thanks to the religious watchdog blog, the Wartburg Watch, this woman told the Dallas Morning News in an interview Saturday that she met Morris in 1981. She was a traveling preacher, began preaching at her family's church. She said Morris and his wife and the young son became close to her family, and she was staying at her house in 1982. When he asked her to come to his room, he told her to lay on his bed and then began touching her inappropriately. She's now 52 years old. She said the abuse continued for about the next 4.5 years. And so it's pretty serious and important news and allegations against this guy who, of course, advised Trump as one of his religious advisors. In other news, Governor of California Gavin Newsom has called for a statewide ban on smartphone use in schools. We'll see how that goes in California and if it gets passed. The Russian president, autocrat, dictator, authoritarian monster, Vladimir Putin, is visiting his almost equal, Kim Jong-un, in North Korea. He arrived for a visit yesterday, vowing to bring ties with North Korea to new heights. Justin Timberlake was arrested in the Hamptons and charged with drunken driving, apparently, which is a big story yesterday because I think it's a somewhat slow news day. Is that possible? I don't know. Maybe he's that big of a star. All I'm knowing is if you're that wealthy, if you're that rich, why are you ever driving drunk? Why don't you have a personal driver, much less call an Uber? But that happened. And here's some good news. How about that? I'll end with a good news headline. Well, two good news headlines. First, Boris Epshteyn, who oversees the disgraced former president's legal team, has himself in legal trouble. He's pled not guilty to 9 felony charges in Arizona's election interference case. I knew that guy very well because we both worked at CNN together. He used to come on my old show, and then he would beg to keep coming on, but he was so disingenuous, such a bad faith liar and loser. I banned him from the show, one of the few. And finally, now here's that good news story in Thailand. It comes from Thailand. Lawmakers approved a marriage equality bill positioning Thailand to become the first in Southeast Asia to legalize same-sex marriage. So great news headline to end on. Now let's get to some of the sound bites from yesterday. I don't usually watch her show when it's on, but I like Rachel Maddow when she's being interviewed by others. She's out there promoting, I think, her new podcast, and she was on The View. And I think she does an excellent job explaining the threat of a second Trump term in Project 2025 to the View's audience, which is very important.
Project 2025. Yeah. It's an agenda the far-right conservatives are pushing for, and it has some really concerning attacks on our institutions, like eliminating the Department of Education, replacing government employees with political appointees. Yeah. How realistic do you think these proposals are? Because that part scares me. All of that scares me way more than even Donald Trump.
And it's like 800 pages long.
When Donald Trump won the election in 2016, fair and square, he said it was rigged. Right. He won the Republican primaries. He said they were rigged. He ran for re-election in 2020. Before the election, he said it was rigged. Mm-hmm. Then when he lost the election, he said it was rigged. He does not like elections. He does not like voting as a system by which we decide who's going to be the president.
Yeah, right.
When he was running for re-election in 2020, the Republican Party decided they were no longer going to have a platform. They abolished their platform and said, our new platform is whatever Donald Trump wants, we're for that.
That's right.
So if you don't stand for anything other than what he wants, you don't vote, you just put him in power. Yeah. And once he's there, nobody is allowed to disagree with him or say anything that he doesn't believe.
And what is that called?
That is what a lot of other countries all around the world have, and it is not democracy.
Right. Yeah.
And so he's trying to get rid of the American system of government, and that means getting rid of a government that does anything other than serve him, and that's what Project 2025 is all about. Yeah. And that exists everywhere in the world, and it has never existed here before. And so I really think the bottom line here is that Trump and his movement, they are not running against Democrats. They're running against democracy. Yeah. They're running against the democratic process. They want to radically change the kind of system that we have, the government that we have. Yeah. And we're alive as American citizens in that time, and we're going to be the ones who decide if the American system of government survives or if it's taken over instead by a strongman authoritarian form.
Scary stuff, of course, but well explained by Rachel Maddow, so good to share. And now let's go over to the PBS NewsHour, which, of course, is the best of all the big network shows, news shows in my mind. I should be using audio from it more all the time. But this is vaccine specialist. His name is Dr. Paul Offit. He was on and he talked about RFK Jr. running for president. And this is some pretty serious, I think, claims here. He says he's directly responsible for the deaths of 83 people in Samoa, most of whom were young children, due to his role in depressing vaccination rates on the island. Here we go.
And to help put some of Mr. Kennedy's comments into context, we're joined by Dr. Paul Offit, who is a member of an FDA advisory committee on vaccines. He's also director of the Vaccine Education Center at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
So RFK Jr. is widely known as an anti-vaccine activist. He has a much larger platform now as he runs for president. He says that many of his views are misunderstood. They're taken out of context. Help us understand what he's been promoting and what the science tells us about it.
Well, he's been promoting false information about vaccines. He's been promoting the notion that vaccines cause autism, which is clearly not true, or cause a variety of other chronic diseases like diabetes or multiple sclerosis or attention deficit disorder, and that's all not true. So what he does is, by putting misinformation out there, he causes people to make bad decisions that put themselves and their family at risk.
You also point to one episode where he spoke out against the measles vaccine. What was the impact of that?
In Samoa, there were 2 children that died immediately following receipt of a measles vaccine. And the way it works in Samoa is they have a MMR vaccine in powdered form. It needs to be diluted in water. 2 nurses made a mistake. Instead of diluting it in water, they diluted it in a muscle relaxant. Those children stopped breathing and died immediately. Now, very quickly, within 2 weeks, it was realized what that mistake was. It was a nursing error. But nonetheless, RFK Jr. seized on that. He flooded Facebook with the information that measles vaccine is killing children in Samoa. He went to Samoa. He met with anti-vaccine activists. He met with senior officials in Samoa and kept the drumbeat alive that measles vaccine was killing children in Samoa. As a consequence, vaccination rates fell from 70% to 30%. And between September and December of 2019, there was a massive measles epidemic. In this island nation of 200,000 people, there were 57,000 cases of measles and 83 deaths. Most of those deaths were in children less than 4 years of age. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had everything to do with that. And that shows you how disinformation can kill.
Wow. That is very, very big deal, very important, and well explained by Dr. Paul Offit yesterday on the PBS NewsHour. And now let's, speaking of COVID, go to Dr. Fauci. He's out promoting a book. You know, I don't know if he's making money off this book. I wouldn't mind. He's probably giving away a lot of the proceeds. Who knows? But he's on MSNBC with Ari Melber talking about when he was serving during COVID, during the Trump administration, and Trump was believing anything he wanted to and anything anybody would tell him.
And that blunt fixation on selling a message or lying about it, his reelection, was that different and distinct from other presidents you dealt with?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it was so obvious. It was a great deal of difference because, I mean, he again, I believe he wanted so badly for this to go away the way influenza goes away. And when he saw it was not going away, then he was hoping for some magical solution. And he even used those words, it's going to go away like magic. And then when that didn't work, then we had to have these miracle cures like hydroxychloroquine, which he got from Laura Ingraham on Fox News. And then after that, he would bring in somebody like Scott Atlas, who was telling him what he wanted to hear. It was tough.
These interviews with Dr. Fauci are really interesting. But I'm going to go to President Biden, who yesterday made the big immigration announcement I mentioned earlier. And I want to share with you some of his comments during that announcement yesterday.
We're much better and stronger nation because of dreamers like Javier, who just introduced me. So today I'm announcing new measures to clarify and speed up work visas to help people, including dreamers, who have graduated from U.S. colleges and universities, landed jobs in high-demand, high-skilled professions that we need to have grow to see our economy grow. It's the right thing to do. I want those who've been educated at U.S. college and universities to put their skills and knowledge to work for here in America. I want to keep building the strongest economy in the world with the best workforce in the world. We've already created 15 million new jobs, a record. We're seeing record economic growth, a record of small business growth. And I doubt why the action we're taking today matters. If you wonder about that, just ask business leaders, ask labor leaders, ask economists, ask elected officials. They know it's good for American business. They know it's good for the American economy. They know it's good for America, period.
And here's a little bit more from the president's press conference yesterday, talking about the threat of Trump and Republicans.
Let me close with this. I refuse to believe that to secure our border, we have to walk away from being in America. For that's generations have been renewed, revitalized, and refreshed by the talent, the skill, the hard work, the courage, and determination of immigrants coming to our country. Look, the Statue of Liberty is not some relic of American history. It still stands for who we are. But I also refuse to believe that for us to continue to be America that embraces immigration, we have to give up securing our border. They're false choices. We can both secure the border and provide legal pathways to citizenship. But we have to acknowledge that the patience and goodwill of the American people is being tested by their fears at the border. They don't understand a lot of it. These are the fears my predecessor is trying to play on when he says immigrants, and his words are poison the blood of the country. When he calls immigrants, in his words, animals, When he was president, he separated families and children at the border. And now he's proposing to rip spouses and children from their families and homes and communities and place them in detention camps. He's actually saying these things. It's hard to believe it's being said, but he's actually saying these things out loud. And it's outrageous. Folks, I'm not interested in playing politics with the border or immigration. I'm interested in fixing it. I said it before.
All right. The president yesterday at his press conference announcing the new policy on immigration and spouses, legal protection for undocumented spouses. All right. Now let's head over to Fox News. I'm going to Fox News because Brett Baier had J.D. Vance on. J.D. Vance, of course, is one of the people that the disgraced former guy is thinking of putting on the ticket as the VP, and he was a harsh critic of Trump, one of the harshest critics for a long time. Brett Baier read a bunch of those criticisms to J.D. Vance, and we'll listen to him respond for a little while, and then I'll cut off his drivel.
You know, Senator, this is an evolution, and I know you've been asked about this before, about past comments that you've made about Donald Trump. You've said, I'm a never Trump guy, never liked him. Terrible candidate, idiot if you voted for him, might be America's Hitler, might be a cynical a-hole, cultural heroine, noxious and reprehensible. Those are things that the left is going to come after you, and they're probably going to be put in ads should you be chosen as the VP pick. How do you deal with them now?
Yeah, well, I think the simple answer is you've got to respect the American people enough to just level with them. Look, I was wrong about Donald Trump. I didn't think he was going to be a good president, Brett. He was a great president, and it's one of the reasons why I'm working so hard to make sure he gets a second term. I think you should. When you're wrong about something, you should change your mind and be honest with people about that fact. And I actually think, again, whether this is running as his running mate or running and supporting him as a United States Senator, Brett, I think it actually presents a real opportunity to talk to the American people, because a lot of people didn't think Trump was going to be a good president.
All right. A lot of people didn't think he was going to be a president and good president, and a lot of those people were right. He never became a good... What is he? He's wearing a red tie as well, just to be even that much more of a sick sycophant. All right, let's now head over to CNN, where last night the CNN fact checker was on with Abby Phillips, and he went through the disgraced former guy's weird speech that he gave yesterday in Racine, Wisconsin, and I'll give you about a minute and a half of the fact checks before I cut Daniel Dale off.
Daniel, take it away.
He said there was world peace in 2020. There was very much not. He said he won Wisconsin in 2020. He lost. He said the Democrats rigged the 2020 election. A lie. He said people around President Biden cheat on elections. No. He said people's votes tend to disappear. They simply do not. He said 107,000 people attended his recent rally in New Jersey. That's at least tens of thousands too high. He said he saved Kenosha, Wisconsin in 2020 during rioting when the Democratic governor wouldn't act to intervene. In fact, that governor deployed the National Guard before Trump told him to. Trump said cocaine was found at the White House about a month ago. That was actually about 11 months ago. He said it was hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of cocaine. It was a little bag, maybe generously in the hundreds of dollars worth. He said Biden orchestrated his New York criminal trial. Zero evidence of that. He said Biden was also behind all of his cases, including civil trials. Baseless again. He said Biden wandered off at the G7 and didn't know where he was. No, Biden was briefly chatting with a skydiver who had landed near the group. He said he was indicted more than infamous Al Capone. No, Al Capone had more indictments than him. He said he was in Washington the other day for one of his trials. He was actually there for meetings with congressional Republicans. He said Nancy Pelosi turned down his offer of 10,000 soldiers on January 6th. She never got such an offer and would not have had the power to reject it even if she did. He said the January 6th committee deleted all records. Just did not happen. He said he's the only president who didn't start a war. Jimmy Carter didn't start any wars. He said he finished the war in Syria. No, and got U.S. soldiers out. He actually left hundreds of troops there. He said Syria and Turkey have been fighting over their border for, quote, 2,000 years. That border, Abby, is less than a century old.
All right, there you go. Daniel Dale doing great work, as he always does, over at CNN. It is a tough job to have to fact check the president, but he went on for a couple more minutes on that. Okay, one more thing I want to play before I get to some humor, some comedy, which is certainly needed. This, I didn't say in the news headlines that happened while I was sitting here doing the show that we lost Willie Mays yesterday at the age of 95 years old. The great Willie Mays is gone, and I thought it was worth mentioning, or at least playing one thing I found real quick, which is President Obama giving him the Presidential Medal of Honor a few years back. I should be playing Willie Mays in his own words, but I looked around for a good clip and I ran out of time. I'm sure there are plenty out there, but I like this from the former president.
We don't have time to list all of Willie Mays' statistics. 660 home runs, 302 lifetime batting average. The list goes on and on. I won't describe that miracle grab at the Polo Grounds either, because Willie says that wasn't even his best catch. I will say this. We have never seen an all-around five-tool player quite like Willie before, and we haven't seen one since. He could throw and he could field, hit for contact and for power, and of course he was so fast he could barely keep a hat on his head. On top of that, Willie also served our country, and his quiet example, while excelling on one of America's biggest stages, helped carry forward the banner of civil rights. A few years ago, Willie rode with me on Air Force One. I told him then what I'll tell all of you now. It's because of giants like Willie that someone like me could even think about running for president.
All right. Willie Mays, arguably one of the greatest. He's not the greatest baseball player of all time, of his time for sure. And little known fact, he was Barry Bonds' godfather. I mean, if you know anything about baseball, you probably know that. And if you don't, you probably don't care. Anyway, let's go to some comedy. How about that? Here's Stephen Colbert, who was back, not working a lot of weeks this summer. A lot of the late night shows is my understanding. But last night he took a shot at the disgraced former president, as he does most nights. And it was his birthday. And so he was talking about that. And that's when we start.
Yes, you're just old. You're old, okay? Trump celebrated in Florida at a fundraiser that featured this towering cake, which looks delicious and looks like it stormed the Capitol on January 6th. That fondant can take a punch. It's a lovely cake, but I'm surprised they didn't go for Trump's favorite cake, Fudgy the... Well... No surprise, Trump turned the celebration into one of his rallies and introduced his new Get Out the Vote line.
I actually tell our people, we don't need your vote. We got so many votes, we don't need them.
Okay. That's okay. You heard him, Trump folks. He doesn't need your vote. You know what? On November 5th, take a U-Day MAGA style. Go get your gun a mani-pedi. Maybe a couple's massage with your truck. Yell at your kid's teacher about how the very hungry caterpillar transitions into a butterfly. Have fun. I understand. Brown bear. What do you see? I understand why Trump is not thrilled about turning 78, because his entire campaign message is Biden is old. But if Trump won at 78, Trump would be the oldest president ever inaugurated. He's so old, they're going to have to swear him in on a stack of Depends in a walk-in bathtub. Now, of course, while Trump's hairstyle stays forever young, you can't say the same about the brain right below it. We got more proof of that this weekend when he tried to shame Joe Biden into taking a cognitive test and brought up his old White House doctor, Ronnie Jackson. That name again. Ronnie Jackson. Mr. Trump.
I took a cognitive test and I aced it. Dr. Ronnie Johnson. Does everyone know Ronnie Johnson?
I love Ronnie Johnson. Doc Ronnie Johnson. He gave me the test, then I went home to my beautiful wife, malaria, and my two hideous sons, Urkel and Carl's Jr.
All right, there you go. Colbert is back, at least this week, a few days. And now let's get to my guest, shall we? He is real great. I love talking to Andrew Seidel. I've gotten to know him very well. I think you should get both of his books, The Founding Myth and American Crusade. He's an author, an attorney, defended the First Amendment for more than a decade, in court, out of court. He's dedicated his whole career to challenging religious privilege and battling Christian nationalism. He speaks and writes extensively about religious freedom, and he's been all over the place media-wise. And I hope that you'll go get the books. I hope that you'll go follow him on TikTok, on Twitter, everywhere else that he is. I'll put all the links to his social media in the show notes. I think this is a great conversation, an important conversation and guest. Really happy that Andrew was able to join me again. I'll post this one up on YouTube along with more clips, which I'm posting. Go to youtube.com/standupwithpete to see more of my interviews rather than just only listen to them. Let's do it right now with Andrew Seidel. All right, he's back, and I'm very excited to see him. Big fan. Andrew Seidel is joining me, one of the smartest guys to talk to about some really important issues. Unfortunately, you are an expert on some really serious shit.
Yeah, it's not a fun area to be an expert on. Religion.
What were you going to do before this became something you wrote 2 books about and have spoken all over the country and highly in demand guest, et cetera?
Yeah, man, I went to law school to save the world. Literally. I wanted to fight climate change. I got environmental law, international environmental law. And then I realized that there's actually like a really strong connection between the environmental movement and fighting Christian nationalism. And nobody was really realizing that and making that connection. And I realized like doing this work of separating church and state and fighting to uphold our secular democracy actually does a whole lot of work in the environmental context that people may not quite get.
Yeah, that's for damn sure. It's pretty primary in terms of the issues that are threatening us. Do you think, Andrew, that the debate around our origins, you've written so much and talked about this, is still something that we should continue talking about? Or is this just like we're in our camps and we're all settled? Because I think it's something that we continue to need to educate, especially young people about. It's so easy to go down one path or another, and you're not necessarily learning this stuff in school, or you're confused about it. I feel like someone like you needs to keep writing and talking about this, but I could see someone making an argument like, everybody's got their beliefs. They think their rights are given to them by God, and that the founding fathers were all Christians, and this is a Christian nation and all that. Nothing's going to change. Where do you fall down on that?
I think that's just so wrong. First of all, I know people's minds have changed on this. And there are tons of people who are stuck in information bubbles, sometimes deliberately. If you are in a deeply conservative Christian family, you may be homeschooled. You may end up going to, if you go to college at all, going to a Christian college. You might end up, let's say you like are top tier, you might go to a Christian law school and then be a clerk for some of the most Christian nationalist justices, Justice Sam Alito, for instance, like out there. You may never break out of your bubble, but I've heard from so many people who have broken out of those bubbles and not necessarily left religion behind entirely, though there are plenty of those too, but who are deconstructing and finding, a less conservative version of their religion, and who are like, I had no idea about this stuff. I had no idea that our Constitution was the first godless Constitution, that we the people meant that the power comes from the people and not a God, which was the first time any society had been built on that ideal, right? Like, there are so many people out there who don't get that, and they've just heard the Christian nationalist disinformation, right? That the idea that we are a Christian nation, that our laws are based on the Ten Commandments, stuff like that. And when they break out of that echo chamber, they're not only do they feel betrayed, but they are sponges and they just absorb so much of this. And I've gotten so many wonderful letters. I think it's one of the highest honors as an author, but from people in that situation. But I learned so much from your book. I had no idea. Thank you so much.
That's great.
It's the best.
Yeah. That's probably the question I should have asked. I'm sure it's true. And I'm glad people are continuing to find your work. And you've got a great list, by the way, of colleagues who've written a lot about the threat of Christian nationalism. I was just looking at it on your website. There's so many great scholars and writers and speakers out there, but your work is so specific and so important. I'm glad to hear that that's been the general, that you've gotten that much of a reaction, because we do have to keep countering these narratives all the time, and they appear everywhere, but they are very pernicious and dangerous, as we're seeing now play out. We can talk about each branch of government. We can talk about how it plays out in different states, but it seems like the Supreme Court is where it seems to be ending. What do you want to say about what we've seen so far, maybe before we get to what we might see? Actually, I should ask you, what do you think about the Alito recordings? Learning?
Yeah, I don't think we learned anything, actually. The one thing that is probably the most salient is we learned how emboldened Sam Alito and his wife are. and how deeply enmeshed they are in that information bubble that I was talking about before. I think that's probably the only thing that we learned. If you have read my second book, American Crusade, the idea that Sam Alito is espousing these Christian nationalist positions and abusing his power to impose this Christian nationalist vision on the country, that is nothing new. You can look back at 10, 15 years of Sam Alito's opinions as a Supreme Court justice, from most recently overturning Roe versus Wade to go back to the Hobby Lobby decision in 2014, where he says that corporations have a religious belief that trumps the rights of workers to access birth control. Right? This has been clear in his writings as a Supreme Court justice for at least a decade. And so I think we saw some interesting verbal confirmation of that. And it's not often that you hear a recording of a Supreme Court justice speaking like that. But I don't even think these were that unguarded, especially the Roberts recording. Right? This happened in a setting.
What was the Roberts recording? I feel like that didn't get a lot of attention.
It did, because
the Chief Justice was also recorded secretly, right?
Secretly recorded, but in a public setting where he was interacting with a stranger, right? And it's the same kind of thing. I think you can look at Roberts's opinions and you can see that he is trying to check every box on the conservative wish list. That's his end goal. He wants to do it more slowly than folks like Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas, right? He wants to preserve the institution of the court. So everybody will have probably heard by now, in the wake of this leaked audio, that Roberts is a great institutionalist, right? That means he wants to protect the court as an institution, which is true. But the reason he wants to do that is because he knows that's the only way that he can preserve the conservative change that he is forcing upon the country. If the court is viewed as illegitimate, the change that it is imposing on us is also going to be viewed as illegitimate. Whereas Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas are like, they're just drunk on their power and they're gone. They don't give a damn anymore. But I still think you get in the Alito leaked audio, you just get that flavor of they really are steeped, and especially with the flag flying stuff, they're steeped in that information bubble in a way that was definitely, we hypothesized reading his opinions, but I think was more confirmed, especially his wife.
It's hard to believe that a Supreme Court justice, much less certain other judges in different courts and others, believe some of the things they do in terms of their religion. And it's harder for someone like me to believe because I've been so far from it for forever, never really obviously believed in much of it at all. But yet what you're saying is if you read Alito's decisions and his legal opinions over the years, you would come away with that he's a very religiously conservative guy making a lot of these arguments. But in fact, when you hear his wife and when you hear him and you see some of his lifestyle and you see there's actually flags flying over, it would seem that he is actually personally ideologically driven by his extreme Catholicism.
Yes, I think that's absolutely fair. And right, like there's nothing wrong with being Catholic. There's nothing wrong with being a conservative Catholic. I disagree with them on a lot of their beliefs and on the way that impacts public policy, for instance. But when you are a judge or a justice on the Supreme Court, when you put on that robe, your religion is secondary. In fact, it shouldn't play any role at all, right? Your job is to interpret the Constitution, not through the lens of your personal religious beliefs, but through the text and of the Constitution itself as those cases are brought to you. And that is something that I have argued has not been happening at our Supreme Court, especially with the ultra-conservative justices on the Supreme Court for the last decade. One of the things that I say in American Crusade is that these justices are crusaders. And exactly what they are ideologically motivated and abusing their power to impose their personal religion on the country. And the flags, I think, are just like this perfect example of that. They are clearly aligning themselves with January 6th, with Stop the Steal. That really ought to be clearly aligning themselves with Christian nationalism. And that really ought to scare everybody in this country. Because I think what you're alluding to at the beginning with your question there, right, is like we, I think as a country broadly, don't expect our justices to do that. We expect them to be unbiased and impartial. That's the whole reason they're put there. Now, that image is certainly breaking down, and I think that's a good thing at this point because of where we are.
I think it was the Supreme Court Chief Justice of the Alabama Court is before the IVF ruling on something else where he cited God's wrath
Yeah, and the Bible, something like 40 times he mentioned God.
Yeah, and I know that was more common in the history of this country. But when I hear judges talking about God's wrath, I think of, I don't know, like the Ayatollahs in Iran or the Taliban or even some of these extremists in Israel and other religious extremists. But I don't like to think of American judges of any faith or background citing God's like that makes me...
It's un-American. It's un-American. Let's say it. It truly is antithetical to some of the best principles that can be found in our Constitution, especially the separation of church and state.
Yeah, your greatest quote, in my opinion, America will never be a Christian nation because the moment it becomes a Christian nation, it will cease to be America because America is not founded in or dominated by a religion, or shouldn't be at least. I guess it is in terms of legislatively and judicially, it would seem.
And I think that's the question. I would never suggest that Christianity hasn't played a role in American history. Of course it has. And of course it has a cultural role to play. And of course it has a personal impact on millions of people in this country. But that's a different question from our legal identity, our constitutional identity, what principles our government was based on. And in that sense, you can't declare that the United States is a Christian nation or say that we were founded on Christian principles. The United States is not in any sense founded on a Christian religion, as the Treaty of Tripoli lets us know, it's a beautiful turn of phrase, and it happens to be language that was negotiated under President Washington, unanimously approved by the Senate, and then signed by President Johnson. If you're looking for some founding knowledge, that's a pretty nice turn of phrase, too. The United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion.
See the faces of people learning that for the first time. I remember when I learned that, I was like, I never knew that happened. And that's a pretty conclusive situation, story, and documented set of facts to convince folks. I'm of the opinion that the anti-abortion movement is a religious-led and religious movement. It's not a scientific movement or a medical movement. You can say it's about controlling women and it's anti-women and so on, but more than anything else, I think the easiest way to put it is it's religious and it's Christian and it's new-ish. It happened in our lifetime that it became an issue within the Christian community that animated so many. In Reagan adopted it, obviously, and it's been all uphill or downhill, depending on which side of it you're on. And so where do you make of, do you agree that it's a religious movement, the anti-abortion movement, that includes when it comes to abortion, obviously, but the abortion pill, contraception, and now IVF as well?
Absolutely. I think it's very clear that this is a movement that is motivated by religion. And if you look at the politics of it and the history of it, it's this really fascinating story where, and I actually talk about this in the new God and Country documentary that just came out. After Brown versus Board of Education decreed that segregation was no longer permissible in public schools, we're going to desegregate. Separate is not equal. It's inherently unequal. After you get that, you have the religious right in this country, what would become the religious right, looking around, actively searching for a new issue that they could use to animate their base, their supporters, right? Because all of a sudden segregation and racism are not working for them, not just legally, but also becoming unpopular more broadly in the country. And so to avoid sounding like the racists they were, they actually chose abortion as the wedge issue to divide this country. And one of the reasons we know that is because when Roe versus Wade first came down, there was barely a peep made. Now, the small opposition that did exist at the time was religious. Catholic Church has been pretty consistent, but you don't see the religious right and evangelical right kind of latching onto that until after 5 years, really, after Roe versus Wade comes down, when they select it as a wedge issue to divide the country. And to your broader question, I think you're absolutely right. The end of Roe was just the beginning. They are coming for contraception. They are coming for in vitro fertilization. They are coming for marriage equality. Right? There is no amount of power or privilege that is going to satisfy and satiate the Christian nationalists. They are not going to stop until we stop them.
That's scaring me. You're scaring me.
Good. Like, people really do need to be afraid. I will say our country has survived previous waves of Christian nationalism. We have, and we can survive this wave of Christian nationalism. But people have to wake up to this threat and fight back.
I was about to say, what's it going to take? But I do feel like what it is going to take is the overturning of Roe. And I think taking women's reproductive rights and watching women suffer is what it's going to take. I feel like that's what this election, more than anything else, and primarily is going to pivot on. I don't know if you want to put your political pundit hat on, but how much of an animating issue do you think women's reproductive rights? Plus, there's all these other decisions that are going to come down, one more on abortion, potentially this June from the Supreme Court. And then you have these other lower courts making decisions like IVF, and you have the Southern Baptist decision on IVF. It's not a drip of taking women's reproductive rights. It is a flood of stories coming in. And I feel like it's got to be the thing. That has to be the thing when you're taking women's rights. It's got to be the animating thing that helps people bring people out to vote in November. Your thoughts?
I think it's going to be a huge decider in the election. But people have to remember that, we talk about the last election being decided by 7 million votes. And that was the popular vote. The last election was decided by 40,000 votes in 3 states.
Yeah.
That's a razor-thin margin. So every single vote, every single phone call, every single text, anything people do in this fight is going to make a difference. And the other side understands that, right? Like, it's not just Sam Alito or Clarence Thomas. It's judges at all levels. I mean, the reason that we're seeing the mifepristone case, which the Supreme Court decided, and the emergency abortion care case, which the court's going to decide probably this week, EMTALA, or next week, right? Like, it's lawmakers, it's their political allies across the country are advancing this Christian nationalist agenda. And it really is Christian nationalism really is on the march. And I think it's not just, I think certainly we need to fight back. We need to wake people up to this threat. And a huge part of that is reproductive justice and freedom. I also think we need a national recommitment to the separation of church and state. You asked me that offhand question at the beginning, like how I got into this work. And one of the reasons that I got into fighting for church-state separation is because it doesn't just impact the environment and environmental law and our ability to fight climate change, but it also impacts all of these other issues that I care about. LGBTQ equality, right? Reproductive freedom, as we've just been talking about for the past 20 minutes, right? Like, public education, which already tied in a little bit to our discussion of whether people are even aware of true American history or whether they're being force-fed this stuff from like PragerU.
They are not. I don't think I talked to you about it, but listeners know we just lost 3 seats on our Board of Education to what I would call Christian nationalists. Yeah. What the things that they believe. Wild. What does the national recommitment to separation of church and state look like?
I think it is. There's this Kennedy gave this great speech a while back. It was actually
RFK Jr.
No, excuse me. JFK Jr.
Oh, I wasn't sure.
I believe in America where the separation of church and state is absolute. And that's what we need to get back to, because I don't think people realize how it connects to every single one of these other issues that they care about. Public education, reproductive freedom, the environment, LGBTQ equality, so much more, so many things that you don't realize. Like, it is the foundation of our democracy. That wall of separation is what allows us to come together as equals and build a stronger democracy and compromise. And we have seen historically that when religion works its way into our political debates, our government debates, think about abortion, right? The ability to solve those issues is gone. And it divides the country further. So I really do think that people need to realize how important and what an umbrella issue separating church and state is. It connects to so many of the other things that you care about if you sit down and spend a little time thinking about it.
That's for damn sure. How much have you been thinking about this project 2025? Seems like everybody's talking about it and what it would mean for everything that you think about and work on.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. And in fact, the organization that I work for in my day job when I'm not writing books, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, has got a big push coming up on Project 2025 that we're going to see the first couple weeks of July. You will see it. In fact, if you want to have me back on to talk about it more, I'd love to. But I think Project 2025 it's one of the scariest things out there. And so many people, there was a study that just dropped, or some numbers that just dropped a couple of weeks ago, where I think it was, don't quote me on this exactly, but it was something like 78% of the country doesn't know or has not heard of what Project 2025 is. And if you are one of those people who's listening, like, it's a plan for a Christian nation, right? It's the playbook that Christian nationalists are going to use to bring about this vision of a Christian nationalist dystopia, right? They want to wring every one of our tax dollars out of the federal government and funnel them into private industry and private churches that supported their chosen Christian nationalist candidates. And then they're going to shut down the government and rob you of all the crucial services that you need so that you're forced to rely on churches for support. We're talking no EPA to stop polluters, no HHS to keep kids safe and healthy, no Department of Education. They want to sunset that. That's the word that they use. So forget about public schools. Independent agencies are going to become political tools for Christian nationalists to wield against their enemies. Politicians and preachers, not healthcare providers, are going to be deciding what healthcare women get. Public schools are going to be just defunded in favor of religious schools. It's everything they have ever wanted and everything we fear. That's what Project 2025 is.
Said, yeah, the headline at Washington Post, which used to be a newspaper up until this week, apparently, I won't give up. Billions in taxpayer dollars now go to religious schools via vouchers. The rapid expansion of state voucher programs follows court decisions that have eroded the separation between church and state. School vouchers can be used at almost any private school, but the vast majority of the money is being directed to religious schools, according to a Washington Post examination of the nation's largest voucher programs. I'm sure you already knew about that.
Yeah, this is something I talk about in American Crusade pretty extensively. And this actually, where vouchers came from the first time we started instituting vouchers on a widespread scale in this country? After Brown versus Board of Education, when in the South there was going to be integrated public schools, they said, nope, we're going to funnel that money to private schools that can discriminate and that can maintain segregation. So I have a whole chapter on this in American Crusade if people want to know more, but it absolutely is going to religious schools. And some of the voucher programs, upwards of 95, 99, even 100% in one of the cases that I detail in the book, are religious schools. So it's not that these are going to secular private schools. These are going to religious schools, and the vast majority of those are Christian.
How closely, we've been talking a lot about the Supreme Court, everybody should be. How closely are you following the legislative branch, whether it be U.S. Congress or state houses across the country, and the laws that they're pushing and passing? I think a lot of people know about Florida. By the way, I was just reading yesterday in relation to the flooding down there with the storm. Southern Florida had got a foot of rain in 7 seconds or some shit. And it's just terrible. And everybody in Southern Florida, even including the Republican mayors and politicians generally, are understanding and believe in climate science. But of course, DeSantis doesn't. And he banned mentions of climate change in something or other curriculum or somewhere he has power to. And it's so enraging and also, though, fascinating. When we talk about political correctness and we talk about speech and canceling, they ban the use of the words. They did this with the financial crisis as well. The Republicans in Congress banned, I think it was deregulation or something, from the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission's report. They ban climate change. They ban the words that point to the primary causes of a problem. They don't let you use those words. So my question was about legislative efforts, but language matters so much. And
yeah. No, the quote that's been going through my head, it's actually since Trump's conviction. There's a quote from George Orwell's 1984, where Winston, the main character, is talking with one of the party officials who's in charge of regulating newspeak. And he says, it's a beautiful thing, the destruction of words. And that first popped up for me when Trump was running. And then again, in the wake of his conviction, seeing kind of the response from the other side. But this is what we're talking about. Go read 1984, the part of the playbook. So yeah, I will say, not personally, but Americans United for Separation of Church and State, AU.org, we do a ton of work tracking legislation all around the country, thousands and thousands of bills. And we actually have a few, again, announcements coming up near the end of the month here on some of the more egregious legislation that we've seen pop up around the country. We'll have some kind of exciting announcements. Let me just say, if you're looking for a fighter, if you are this is terrifying, as I think you said, Pete, what do I do? come support Americans United. Talk about having a fighter in your corner. That is AU.
Yeah, because you guys file lawsuits and make things happen and prevent other things from happening. I feel like there are a whole bunch of people that are kind of experts on journalists, watchdogs of sorts, watching the different organizations that fund different movements. And so AU is an organization, obviously works for separation of church and state. But then you've got something like ADF, Alliance for Defending Freedom, and so many other organizations that are so well funded, that are Christian nationalist organizations, and they have so much power and so much money. And so my question to you is, what do the teams look like? What do our budgets look like? I feel like there are so many more of those organizations that are so much more well funded and clearly bringing suits and clearly winning versus just a few others on our side, and our side being one that doesn't believe, that aren't Christian nationalists. Let's just say it, because there's a whole lot of different organizations that are part of coalitions.
No, and we have a lot of this documentation on the AU website. We talk about the shadow network of Christian nationalist groups around the country that's pushing this legislation. Alliance Defending Freedom, Family Research Council, First Liberty Institute, American Center for Law and Justice, right? It's going back to Orwell, it's this Orwellian word salad. A lot of those groups, by the way, are on the Project 2025 advisory board or have signed on to Project 2025 too. So there's this kind of this swirl on the other side. And a lot of the funding comes from networks that are run by Leonard Leo, who we know spent $540 million that we can track, capturing the Supreme Court from 2014 up through 2020. And then the Koch brothers who funneled millions into this. And the truth is, our side is outgunned when it comes to this.
Yeah, that's what I figure.
We are. The two things that we have going for us are that the people are on our side. The reason that Leonard Leo targeted the courts is because they know on that side that they cannot get any of their policies. Abortion bans are wildly unpopular. Banning contraception is wildly unpopular. Like something like 90% of the country supports contraception. They cannot do what they want to do in a democracy. So they capture the more anti-democratic aspects of our government, including the courts, to be able to impose their will on the country. So we have popular opinion and the people are on our side. And then we also have the benefit of being right, which is no small thing.
Yeah, you didn't mention guns. And there's so many other issues where overwhelmingly people agree, but because they've got the courts and because they've got these gerrymandered districts, even if a lot of people in a state don't agree with, say, something like these bump stocks, which is just a crazy make a gun, a machine gun type things. But overwhelmingly people want there to be all kinds of regulations and laws passed to control gun violence. But just another issue, another adding to the pile that you were saying. I'm just looking at this God and Country. I had no idea about it. Rob Reiner produced it. You and so many other people I've interviewed and I look up to are in this. Tell me a little bit about this documentary.
Oh, yeah. It's a really fascinating documentary on Christian nationalism and the role that it's playing in America at this particular political moment. And it's largely geared towards Christians who are learning about Christian nationalism.
Great.
And explaining to them why it's a threat, not just to the country, but to them. But it's very well done. There are certain things that where I were in charge of it, I would change, but I'm just one of the talking heads. And I would really recommend people go check it out, God and Country. It's streaming, I think, everywhere now, so you can go watch it. And then there's another one that's coming out too, or that is out now, called Bad Faith, which dives a lot into some of the history that I was talking about, into the segregationist roots of vouchers and of choosing abortion as the wedge issue to divide the country. Gets in a lot into the Heritage Foundation, Paul Weyrich, another really good documentary that just came out on Christian nationalism too. Bad Faith is that one.
Very cool.
I recommend both.
Yeah, I've got links here. I'll put them in today's show notes. What else did we want to cover? Anything else about the Supreme Court or what's coming over the next?
Yeah, and I think there are two big abortion decisions at the court this term. There's the Mifepristone decision, which we got last week, and then there's the EMTALA decision, which is about abortion care in an emergency situation, where if you're wheeled into an abortion room because you're bleeding, like an abortion, the medical care that you should receive. What happens if you're in a state where abortion is banned? That's an oversimplification of it, but I think a lot of people breathed a sigh of relief when the Mifepristone case came down and it was 9-0. But really, that all that decision did was basically say, we're keeping the status quo. And there was some language in there. One of a law professor who I respect, Liz Sepper, called it a poison pill that could have a big impact on this emergency care case. So I'm deeply worried about where we're going to end up with that case. It looks like we're going to see sweeping religious freedom, scare quotes around that, protections also around that for healthcare providers that don't want to do anything to save a woman's or pregnant person's life. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Lastly, I didn't even ask you about LGBT issues. One of the reasons that we lost, the main reason we lost was this big lie that they told in my town that the board had come up with policy around bathroom use when in fact it was a New York state law. But that was a lie they told, and they were able to gain 3 seats on that lie. And it is a really animating issue. The trans issue, obviously, it's Pride Month. Are you surprised you're here? And what are you concerned about and thinking about in terms of LGBT rights right now?
People can't go read Project 2025 because it's 900 pages, it's 4.1 pounds, and it's infinitely cruel. But it is fully coming for LGBTQ rights and equality in ways that I think people don't fully grasp yet. And the Christian nationalist movement, by and large, is gunning for marriage equality. They have not accepted the Obergefell decision. The personnel on the Supreme Court has changed and has become far more conservative since the Obergefell decision upheld marriage equality. And I'm worried that if they can come up with a vehicle to challenge it and get it before this court, that it won't survive. And Project 2025 is looking to erase marriage equality in any other way that it possibly can through the federal government, not related to the Obergefell decisions. It's still very much a fight, and it's at the forefront of my mind.
Yeah. I'm sure there's some really good journalists covering that specific part and all the different specific parts that I probably should reach out to on that one too. Dude, I love watching everything that you're doing, reading everything that you're doing. Please keep up the great work. You are one of the best, and it's always great to get the opportunity to talk to you. So maybe we'll do it again before or at the end of the month after more of these decisions come out, and we can cry and then talk about how to move forward together.
Yeah, I would love to. It's my absolute pleasure, my friend. Thank you for having me on.
All right, bud. All right, there you go. Andrew Seidel. Go get his books and look everything up in the show notes and thank him for joining me on the show. Please, please, please. That is all I've got for you on today's show. I'm going to go post this baby up. I hope you liked it, appreciate it. John Carroll sings us in. He sings us out. I am so appreciative of him and everybody who is listening to the show all the way to the end, you bumblebees. I hope you have a great day. I hope you stay present, and namaste. Amen. I love you.
Oh, you better stand up. When you're tired of begging, saying pretty please, that's the time you gotta finally get up on your knees. When you can't see the forest for the burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You gotta stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. You got to let him know it's his turn to go. See, all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come. But before the change could begin, they had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.